Trump was the person who brought evangelicalism up to the mountaintop, showed them the empire, and said, hey, if you bow and kiss the ring, I will give it to you. And white evangelicals ever since have been lining up in droves and kissing the ring. What's up, YouTube? Hope you're doing well. We're going to respond to a video that I agree with. I know, shocker, I know. I send you a lot of videos that make my skin crawl sometimes, but this one comes to you by a pastor. Well, I should say he's a former ex-pastor. His name is former ex-pastor. He's a former pastor, now ex-pastor. His name is Brian Recker. A video that he posted a few weeks ago went semi-viral. I watched it and thought, yep, we should talk about this because it hits so many crucial points for why so many of us are leaving the evangelical space. So let's get into it and see what this guy has to say.
So a lot of folks have asked me what originally caused me to step away from my role as an evangelical pastor. It was a long process, but it certainly started in 2015 as Trump rose to prominence. I remember thinking this guy was an absolute buffoon and assuming that the other Christians in my church would agree with me.
Okay, Yes, right on the money. So far, so good. This is the story. I cannot tell you how often I hear it. And I am one of those people. I was someone faithfully serving in my church in 2015, thought that Trump would get nowhere with the evangelical right, especially after the Hollywood Access tapes come out. And boy, was I wrong, because here we are, 7, 8 years later, and Trump is only gaining more popularity in the spaces that so many of us called home at one point. And frankly, many of us say to ourselves, I don't understand. How could the faith tradition that I grew up in, that taught me all of these things about purity and sexual purity, all that stuff, how could they possibly be mad at me because I can't vote for the guy on the cover of Playboy magazine, the guy who's bragging about assaulting women? So I think a lot of us looked at that moment and went, oh my God, I don't understand what is happening. So far, great first assessment.
But when many of them started lining up behind him, I was surprised, especially because there were other candidates like Scott Walker or Ted Cruz, who I didn't like them either, but at least they gestured towards some kind of external morality or piety.
Or even John Kasich. I'm not sure if you remember him, but I was like, wow, this guy's so nice, so kind. And of course, he was completely obliterated by the Trump machine.
And it was a bit of a mask-off moment for me where I realized that the priority of the evangelical movement in America was not family values or morality. It really was power.
Okay, first, he's definitely right here. Now, maybe Brian was more aware of it than I was. I, at the time, was more like, what's going on? It doesn't make sense. How come these values aren't aligning? It wasn't until much later in my own journey, as I was reading and listening and studying and reading our own evangelical history, where I said, oh, wait a second. The only way to reconcile this Trump phenomena in white evangelical spaces and the beliefs that they have is to see them as a handshake for power and control. Put another way, Trump was the person who brought evangelicalism up to the mountaintop, showed them the empire, and said, hey, if you bow and kiss the ring, I will give it to you. And white evangelicals ever since have been lining up in droves and kissing the ring. And the leaders in those movements are the ones responsible for pushing their followers to behave in such anti-Christ ways while claiming to be followers of Jesus.
There's this classic British sketch comedy. There's these two comics, and they're dressed as Nazis, and they have this moment where they're looking at each other, and they're like, have you noticed that we've got skulls on our uniform? And they're like, are we the baddies? Trump was that moment for me.
Now, to be clear, I don't think he's comparing Trump to being a Nazi. That isn't the point. I think he's making the point that in that skit, they didn't realize what side they were on, maybe until it was too late. And Brian is saying what I think a lot of us woke up to, right? Saying, wait a second, I was always told that we were on the right side, that we were always the ones fighting for integrity and for values, Christian values, and for family values. But all of a sudden, Trump, who completely jettisoned all of those values in his personal life and as president, he's the person that we're supposed to be throwing all of our weight behind. That makes no sense. And I think, again, a lot of us, and I am one of these people, started really waking up to the reality that maybe we're the ones on the wrong side of this conversation. So great point by Brian so far.
I realized that, at least in this country, evangelicalism We were the bad guys. Now, for a while, I was happy to have a role where I could push against some of those impulses. You know, folks were watching Fox News 5 nights of the week, and on Sunday morning, I could challenge them to love their neighbors. But I could never really go far enough. I was a part of a movement where we decided we wanted to remain politically neutral and not really get specific.
100%. Brian is talking about a very common thing I hear from a lot of pastors, where they either have this position of this moderate position where they don't want to take sides, which I think is really unwise right now, and I can get into that a little bit later on. But also, I think Brian is explaining and describing something that we don't always realize is happening. There is this power dynamic in evangelicalism where there are leaders who see the problem. I know a lot of pastors who saw the problem of Trump, but their congregations essentially threatened mutiny or to fire that pastor if he ever spoke out about those things. And now listen, you might say, well, the pastor needs to speak out about that. I understand. I totally get it. But when your livelihood, your health care, your kids' school tuition, all of that stuff is tied in to your career, that you are a pastor of a church that is getting paid to shepherd these people. I understand those values that are in tension with each other. I have a family. I have 2 kids. If my paycheck came from being a pastor and my congregation said, we're going to throw you out on the streets with nothing if you talk about this, it'd be very difficult for me to figure out how to navigate such a complicated situation.
It was obvious to me that Trump was the biggest discipleship issue in American evangelicalism.
Yep.
And so if I wasn't talking about that, really, like, what f***ing good was I?
Yes. I mean, Brian is expressing something that, man, has exploded and has divided so many people. I'm talking families, ripped them apart. It's ripped churches apart. This Trump phenomena that we have been seeing for the past 6, 7, 8 years now is not going away and has only gotten more violent. And folks in those spaces who have thrown their weight behind Trump have only gotten more militant. And I think, honestly, Brian read the room. As far as I know, Brian is definitely not a pastor. I'm not sure if he still identifies as a Christian. I'm not sure. But this is another person who is a casualty, we can say, of the divisive, anti-Christ, dehumanizing way that was Trump. Put another way, right? A lot of churches, I hear this all the time from pastors, they blame everyone but themselves for what's happening in America. Over the past 25 years, 40 million people have left churches, broadly speaking, mainline and evangelical. And in evangelical spaces, we're seeing a major hemorrhaging of people leaving. The SBC, for example, experienced one of its biggest losses ever annually in the past year or so. Why do you think that is? Well, these churches are unaccountable. They have so many scandals that they don't handle correctly at all. They allow things like Trumpism, like these far-right media figures like Charlie Kirk, for example, to speak at their churches. And then they start othering people who can't get on board with their far-right political ideology that is Trojan horsed inside of what they call the Christian faith. Frankly put, and I don't use this language lightly, there really seems to be 2 different gospels that we are watching form in America. There are people who believe that the gospel of Trump and the gospel of Second Amendment Jesus is the gospel that is true Christianity. Then you have everyone else who's like, no, that's definitely not it. And then the people who are fully embedded in this Trump world, this MAGA world, are militant and really believe that everyone who's against them is being demonically influenced to destroy the country. And Brian saw that. Brian is pulling on those experiences. I think he's reading the room. I know he watched January 6th when that happened.
Jesus Christ, we invoke your name. Amen. Amen.
And he probably said to himself, yeah, I made the right damn move to leave my church because look at what the church has given America. Now, I want to say one last thing, and this is important. I can hear some of you saying, "Oh, you're being too broad. Oh, it was just a few bad people at January 6th. It wasn't all Christians." What people like you fail to understand is that the evangelical structures, the networks, the institutions, the funding, all tolerate or they feed into the things that have given us Trump, the things that have given birth to the rise of white Christian nationalism. They've been part of the networks that were the prayer teams behind what led to January 6th. And if you don't believe me, look up the 6-part series on Straight White American Jesus podcast. It goes into all the details. So I really hope if you're someone watching this and you think I'm too extreme and the answer is moderation, I hope that you wake up and you realize what is actually going on in white evangelical spaces right now. Because I'll tell you what, it is freaking dire. Just look at what Mike Huckabee said recently about the next election if they don't get their way.
Do you know how political opponents to those in power are dealt with in third world dictatorships, banana republics, and communist regimes? Well, it's simple. The people in power use their police agencies to arrest their opponents for made-up crimes in an attempt to discredit them, bankrupt them, imprison them, exile them, or all of the above. And if you're not paying attention, you may not realize that Joe Biden is using exactly those tactics to make sure that Donald Trump is not his opponent in 2024. Here's the problem. If these tactics end up working to keep Trump from winning or even running in 2024, it is going to be the last American election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets.
Thanks for watching, friends. If you like this video, give us a subscribe and like the video. Also, we are a nonprofit organization, and during the month of September, we are doing a giveaway, a bunch of giveaways. Any donation of $5 or more a month or a one-time donation of $30 gets you entered to win books, co-host a podcast with me, our first ever New Evangelicals mystery box. So click on the link in the notes down there, make your donation. Anytime during the month of September, you'll be entered to win. It helps us hold space for so many people trying to navigate their faith, finding better paths forward. Talk to you all next time.